Today we're going to be talking about the market revolution. Remember in our previous lesson, I talked about that there were these major changes that happened in the early 1800s of the 19th century. And in that first half century, from 1800 to 1850, there was these major changes. And if we think about them like I use the analogy of Photoshop or Procreate, where we can have these different layers or windows in which we can look at these changes. And if we can understand them separately, then we can kind of press them down on each other, and it will help us see a holistic or consistent vision of how America changed in the early 1800s. So last time we looked at Jacksonian democracy, and we saw how there were these innovations that occurred under Jackson, often attributed to Jackson or the emergence of the Democratic Party, specifically the extension of universal white male suffrage. We saw the spoils system. We saw these different innovations that came under Jacksonian democracy. And today we're going to be looking at the market revolution, which is another layer in which we can look at the changes that happened in the early 1800s or the 19th century. So if we look at what is the market revolution, it's not exactly a revolution in markets. It is that, but it's more about what makes these markets possible. So if you remember, John C. Calhoun very early on argued for the taxation of American people and the ability to redistribute that money into the creation of infrastructure. So the idea is that the federal government could tax citizens. The idea is that we can use that money to create things that connect us. So roads, waterways, railroads, canals. We think of what he uses the term conquering space. And that's really what makes the market revolution possible. If we want to give a succinct definition, the market revolution is this period between 1815, right after the War of 1812, to 1850 as we begin to lead into the Civil War. And it's a period where we begin to really pump money into roads, canals, steamboats, eventually railroads. These things will revolutionize, it will transform the face of America and make the interconnectivity and the change of market and market relations possible. What's also really important is historians debate the significance of the market revolution. We know that America became more democratic in the early 1800s. Some historians point to the Jacksonian innovations, universal white male suffrage, spoils system, the focus on the common man as political innovations that made America more democratic. Other historians will point to Native American removal, the failure of extension of political rights to women, and the prolonged extension of slavery is limits to democracy and is actually undermining the notion that Jacksonian innovations in politics really did anything to expand democracy. On the flip side, they will say that the market revolution, by interconnecting people, by making roads and railroads and therefore mail, innovations in technology like the telegraph, that this revolution in communication and technology is actually what expanded democracy in the early 1800s. Under this interpretation is that transportation of ideas that makes anti-slave abolitionist rhetoric, knowledge about political innovations, or the literature of the pre-feminist women's movement accessible. So let's look at a couple major innovations during the market revolution. 1812 to 1837, we have the establishment of the National Road that will connect the eastern seaboard right around Delaware all the way through the middle of the country to St. Louis. First major highway funded by the federal government, originally called the Cumberland Road. Many will point to its effectiveness. Following this, we'll see a network of turnpikes that began to emerge. These are essentially early toll roads. They look very different than the toll roads you might be used to today. Most of them are not much more than dirt roads or gravel roads. But if you think about how big of a change this is, I mean, prior to this, if you're trying to go from one place to another, you're going to have to essentially go across fields and mountains by stagecoach, on horseback, walking. So any innovation, any unified effort by the government to make straight roads paved to some degree is a huge innovation. Following this is emergence of canals. We tend to think of canals as these like huge waterways where big transportation, huge boats can go through. Many early canals were not much more than a couple feet wide, a couple feet deep. It might just be where you could have a structure that would float. You could tie a rope and pull it and it could float on the water, making travel much easier. It'd be hard for us to understand that, but you know, if you're carrying hundreds and hundreds of pounds and you could set it on something that float and then pull it along, this is also a huge innovation. There were also big canals. The most famous of this, 1825, is the Erie Canal. This is essentially going to be a canal that connects the eastern seaboard to the Great Lakes. And think about what this does. This is a game changer. Now you'll be able to transport things from the eastern seaboard all the way through the Great Lakes, all the way up through Lake Huron into Lake Michigan, all the way down to Chicago. And this is going to literally create cities. It's going to put Chicago on the map. If you're a lumberjack somewhere way down in Illinois, you're going to be able to take your lumber up here and put it on a boat, and all of a sudden it can be connected all the way to England that way. I mean, think about what a huge change that is. It's going to open the world to markets that didn't exist prior to this. It also means that any political information that's happened to be circulating on the East Coast can make it to you in a couple days instead of weeks or months. Simultaneously, with the canal system that begins to emerge in the United States, we'll see the harnessing of steam power. Steamboats will become integral in being able to not just conquer space, but to push back against natural currents, where we're going to be able to go upstream. This is really important because the Erie Canal will connect Chicago to the eastern seaboard, and then the Mississippi River will connect all the way down to Louisiana. And now the continental U.S., or what is the United States at this point, will be circumnavigated by water, making travel, making the ability to trade, to buy, to sell, to export and import ideas. All of these become easier and easier as the decades go on. Eventually, as we begin to move forward into the 30s, 40s, and really in the 50s, we'll see that steam power begin to evolve from steamboats into railroads. Here we'll be able to see a zigzag across the nation that will be able to fill in through land what the canal and what the waterway system couldn't do. There's also a revolution in communications. In the 1790s, there's 92 newspapers in the United States. By 1810, there's 371. In 1790, there's 17 post office. In 1810, there are over 28,000 post office in the United States. In 1844, Samuel Morse will develop Morse code, making the transmission of information almost instantaneous. In 1846, we have the emergence of the sewing machine. This rapid industrialization of the harnessing of steam, eventually the sewing machine, will revolutionize the face of America. It'll change dynamics. It will change the way people relate to each other. It will pull women into the workforce. Soon we have the older traditional idea of a farm family that Jefferson idealized so much will begin to be pulled apart by this rapid industrialization. The North in particular will embrace this. We'll have large numbers of rural women begin to leave farms, to leave traditional familial structures and move into the city in search for independence and wage labor to create a new and different life for themselves. When they get there, they'll realize that without the protection of a minimum wage laws, of worker protections, of health regulations, that a lot of times they find themselves only earning a couple dollars for working 70-hour work weeks in hot and humid, terrible conditions. But some people think that this trade-off is worth it because it gives an opportunity for a different future. For many young women, the appeal of autonomy or the social promises of city life becomes worth trading long, hard hours of work in order to have that type of autonomy or that self-actualization, that personal fulfillment. Others find that the life that they left behind might have been better than the hard working conditions that they end up working in 6-7 days a week. Lastly, it's important to remember that when we talk about the interconnectivity that the market revolution produces, the idea that all of a sudden people and ideas and things can travel in such a way that they were never able to before, the idea that liberation narratives, that anti-slave literature, that pro-women's rights literature, that all of these ideas become more easily accessible, that the market revolution creates some sense of democracy, some sense of unity. Those realizations must be tempered by the notion that the cotton gin was also a product of the technological evolution that happened during the market revolution. First innovated in the 1790s by Eli Whitney, the cotton engine made the production of cotton go from something that was difficult and hard to get from raw material to market to something that was 50 more times effective than something by hand. South, which had previously depended on tobacco and indigo and rice, all of a sudden could turn to the cotton. So the market revolution actually made the cotton revolution possible. So if we think about this, we have to interpret the westward expansion that begins to happen, the spread of racial slavery further and further westward into the South, eventually spiraling us into civil war, separating families, taking them through steam-powered steamships upstream. Simultaneously, while the Mississippi River is connecting Chicago to Louisiana, allowing trade, allowing exploration, allowing freedom and movement, it's also tearing slave families apart. Historians will refer to the Mississippi River as the river of dark dreams, where slaves are torn from their families and sold upstream. In this light, the market revolution isn't just the expansion of democratic ideas or free trade or free movement. It also, quote, transforms Southern culture, Northern industry, and race-based slavery, national politics, and international trade simultaneously.